Say hi. Ooh. Aww. Hi guys, welcome back. We're doing another book video. I'm wearing my Vikings sweatshirt today. I am clearly a huge football fan. Actually, I am not, but I promised Nolan I would wear this today in support of the Vikings. I am from Minnesota. I do live in Fargo now, but it's pretty much Minnesota and I'm from Minnesota, so fun fact about me. Also, I don't like football, but Nolan played football and loves football, so that's right. We do what we do for the men that we love. I have this fireplace going just for like vibes, but if it's not the vibe, this might be the last time you see it. But yeah, I'm gonna run down all the books that I read in August and September. September was kind of a slow month for me, but I read a lot of books in August, so I just combined them because I didn't do a video for August. And yeah, I'm gonna start with the books that I read in August and come up to what I'm currently reading. And a lot of these books I either read on Kindle or listened to the audiobook for, like all through the library. So like I don't have physical copies of everything, but I will put the book right here. I actually will remember this time. Okay, so the first book that I read in August was The Wedding Date by Jasmine Guillory. I actually have an office book club. Basically, it's not actually a book club, but like we just share all the books that we're reading and talk about them if we've read the same ones. And this book was so hyped up by my coworkers, and I was so excited for like a cheesy romance book at the beginning of August, and I hated this book. First of all, it's written in third person. A lot of the books that I mentioned are written in third person, and I really prefer books written in first person. I think it's way easier to like connect to the characters if you're hearing their actual thoughts rather than a narrator talking about their thoughts. So it's about this woman who's like 30, and she is going to visit her sister at this hotel, and the elevator breaks down and she's in it with this handsome guy who's like her age, and they get to talking as they're stuck in this elevator together. They have all these flirty moments over like crackers or something like that, and and that part's actually like cute-ish, but then they have banter, and he explains that he's going to his friend's wedding, and him and his girlfriend just broke up, I think, so like he's going without a date. Whatever, the elevator gets back up. He asks her if she will pretend to be his girlfriend and go to this wedding with him. It's like the fake dating trope, which I actually don't hate the fake dating trope, especially in like Christmas movies and stuff. Like I think it can be like a cool, fun vibe, but I don't know, this book just didn't really sell it for me. It's like a fake dating trope, and then of course they end up falling in love or like getting together for real. But the thing I liked was that they had all these situations within this couple, within this relationship, and then they showed the contrasting thought process of the man and the woman, which I thought was really interesting. But since it wasn't in first person, it wasn't like super effective for me. Like I think they just could have gone farther with it if it was in first person, because I think that's actually something very real in relationships, where you have an objective situation but two subjective views on what actually happened in that situation. And that's kind of where my compliments for this book end, because I did not like the main character, the guy Drew. Basically every thought that he has is like a sexual thought. I can't even remember what the girl's name is. That's not a good sign. But yeah, like everything that he thinks of about her is like about her body and about how hot and attractive she is, and that really bugged me, because he's like he's a 30-year-old doctor, and like maybe that's accurate for like a bachelor to be just thinking vulgar thoughts all the time, but it also just doesn't make you like his character. So I didn't really like him, and as the book went on, I just kind of felt like he gave me really bad Christian Grey vibes, and I hated 50 Shades of Grey. So there's a lot of spice, there's not a lot of romance in my opinion, and the thing I really hated was these are two like successful adults who, they're not like young adults, they're not like kids, and they're having like a pretty immature relationship. Like they're making sacrifices in their career and making dumb decisions, and I'm like, I just feel like I'm more emotionally intelligent than them, and for that reason I didn't really like it. I actually gave this book 2.9 out of 5 stars. I think on Goodreads I might have given it 3. But like the more I think back on it, like I just didn't really enjoy reading it. So the second book that I read in August was The Good Sister by Sally Hepworth, and this is about 2 fraternal twin sisters, Fern and Rose, and I really get bugged by names in books. Like Fern and Rose just are like, for some reason those names bothered me. But Fern is a neurodivergent woman. She is a librarian. I believe they describe her as like tall and thin, and then her fraternal twin sister Rose is neurotypical, and she's like short and stout, and I think those are the descriptions. I don't know if I'm remembering that correctly, but anyway, the point is they're creating these 2 fraternal twin sisters who are extremely different, yet they are extremely reliant on one another. So the book alternates between the perspectives of Fern and Rose, which I thought was cool. I thought it was really refreshing to read a book with a neurodivergent main character, because there were a lot of points in the book where it can be really frustrating to read like such a literal interpretation of events and conversations, and just you want to like jump in almost and explain it, but then I realized that that's actually a super realistic like description. That means that the book's doing a good job of like getting you to feel that, and I just think it gives you really good perspective of what it's like to have those conversations. So it kind of is building up between these 2 sisters who you're kind of wondering why they're so close and why Rose is so protective over Fern, and it shows you glimpses into their past and why they're that way. There ends up being a twist. I'm not going to give too much away, but essentially there's a family secret or family secrets, and they are revealed throughout the book. So I actually thought that the plot twist was really good. I wasn't expecting it, and I did find it interesting and refreshing to have like a different type of main character in a novel like this. It's like a thriller mystery. I don't really know what you would describe it as, but it wasn't too much thriller for me. Like I feel like if we're gonna have the whole story be about like a family secret reveal, I feel like it needs to really catch my attention, and this was just like a little bit slow. So I ended up giving this 3.9 out of 5 stars, which like looking back on, I also listened to this on audiobook, and I don't remember liking it enough to give it almost 4 stars, but it kind of trespassed me, and I do remember there were a lot of parts that like shocked me. I thought the writing was good and things like that. So I think I would recommend this to people. I would not recommend The Wedding Date, so that's a good way to know if I like the book or not. But yeah, I thought it was pretty good and like a different, refreshing take on this kind of story. So the third book that I read in August was When Leaves Fall in Paris by Sara Sundin, I believe. I'll put it right here. Just bear with me through this one because I call it When Leaves Fall in Paris like a million times, and it's supposed to be Until Leaves Fall in Paris, so I'm sorry. This is a historical fiction book with elements of romance in it, and it is so good. I just like really enjoyed reading this book. I think I was a little bit biased because I read it after The Wedding Date, and I hated that book so much that this was like refreshing to have a romance that I actually enjoyed and characters I liked. It follows this ballerina who gives up her career as ballerina once World War II is going on, so that she can purchase a bookstore from her friends who are a Jewish American couple who are going back to America before the Nazis invade France for their own protection, obviously. And she purchases this bookstore, and in her town there's also this single dad who runs a car manufacturer, and he's like very wealthy. It's like a family business, and he is an American living in France. I believe she is too. I feel like it was so long ago, I can't remember for sure, but so it's an English bookstore. He's buying books there for his like 4-year-old daughter, and they meet and they have like this connection right away, and she is like, oh, he's whatever. It's literally so cute the way that the author describes like the way that this guy feels about her. It's just night and day difference than The Wedding Date. Like one of like the quotes I highlighted was that he describes being with her as being bewildered by her presence, and it's just like stuff like that is why I love historical fiction and historical romance. So anyway, they hit it off. She finds out that he is this manufacturing these cars for Germany, essentially. Like they took over his plant. This isn't really a spoiler, but without giving too much away, it's kind of like she's not supposed to like him, so she immediately stops because she is like pro the resistance in France, and I don't actually know if this is a spoiler or not, but he is also doing resistance work through his factory while pretending to work for the Germans. So they're both working for the resistance, but everybody thinks that he's working for the Germans, so she has to hate him, and she does hate him for that. Like, it's not like we're gonna still be seeing each other and I still like you type of thing. Like, that's one thing I really liked, was that these characters had dimension and that they really had these values that they cared about, and they weren't gonna let like lust get in the way of their objective and like their values. So that was really cool. And then anyway, you have to see how the story progresses. But I gave this book a 3.9 out of 5 stars. It's weird because that's the exact same rating I gave The Good Sister, but I didn't think that The Good Sister was as good as this one, so I don't know why I did that. But anyway, highly recommend this book if you like historical fiction. It's really cute. So the next book I read in August was The Hunting Wives by Cobb, and this book was really interesting to me because it's a very long book. I listened to this one on audiobook too, I think. I would say it's about 100 pages too long, but if you can get over that and get through it, it wasn't that it didn't keep my attention. I just was like, there's a lot of unnecessary parts of this, and I think it would keep more people's attention if it was shorter. But it's about this woman, Sophie O'Neill, who is a former like businesswoman, career woman from Chicago. She has like a young child and this great husband, and they decide to move back to her hometown in Texas. And it's basically like a big city woman, career woman, becomes a sort of stay-at-home mom in the suburbs type thing back in her hometown. And that's like where you begin with this book. Now, I really did like this book. However, I hated Sophie. I hate when I hate main characters, and it takes a lot in me to realize that I can still like a book even if I hate the main character. But I really did not like Sophie. She is supposed to be this like 30-something former businesswoman, and yet she has this like perfect husband, perfect child, and throughout the whole book she consistently is making decisions that are so immature and like dumb. Like, the things that she seems to be wanting by making these decisions are things that I would expect from like a teenager, and so for that I didn't think it was like super believable. And if it was believable, like, it's just really annoying, and I hated her for that. But basically, she has moved home, and she actually has a friend from growing up who's like one of her lifelong best friends. She has this great husband, like I said, and kid. But there's this group of really rich women in the neighborhood who she's like infatuated with this group, and like really just like jealous, wants to be a part of this group. And she ends up getting invited to what they call the Hunting Wives, which is basically like they just go to one of these women's houses and they shoot clay pigeons, which is really funny because in this book it's supposed to be like a very like cool, edgy thing that these rich women are doing. But I grew up in a small town, and we used to go out into the country and shoot stuff for like fun on a Saturday night, because that's like all you can do in a small town. So it was like funny to me that that's supposed to be like cool. When I grew up, that was like not cool. But anyway, she starts doing this. Of course, there's a lot of dirty secrets within this group and like things that happen. There's actually a murder partway through this book, and this book is so long that when I was redoing my notes for like the synopsis, I forgot that there was a murder. Like, that's like a huge part of the book, but it takes so long to find out who's been killed and like what that whole plot line's about that you like forget that that's what this book is about. But there's so much going on in this book. So basically these friends just keep doing all this really questionable stuff behind their families' backs, behind their husbands' backs. People die. People are accused of murder. There are affairs. There are secrets, lies, all this stuff. I actually found this book so enjoyable to read. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. I look back on this, like maybe it's like a 4.2 out of 5. I did think it was really good. Could have been a little bit shorter. And I hated all of the characters, basically, except for like the husbands, which I hate when that's a thing. Every one of these rich main character women would drink and drive in like every single chapter, and they never mentioned it as like a bad thing that they did. And I'm like, this is like just as bad as all the other stuff they're doing. Why are they drinking and driving all the time? And that just really bothered me. Overall, recommend. Yeah. The next book I read was In My Dreams I Hold a Knife by Ashley Winstead, and this book is recommended a lot on like BookTube and TikTok. It's supposed to be like a very good fall read, which is why I chose it. It was like towards the end of August to get me like in the mood for fall. Essentially, it's about a group of college friends who are going back for a reunion, and one of their friends was murdered when they were in college. So it's told from the perspective of this main character, Jessica. And I actually really liked her because she is now like finding success as like a 30-something, but she's an extremely insecure person, and I thought that that was an interesting element to add, of like hearing her insecure thoughts but also seeing the way she presents herself to others as like a very materialistic and like confident person. So I like that about the book. She is one of these like 6 friends, and they go back to college. I think that's why this is like considered a good fall book, is because it kind of takes place in this university. So it's all told with like an alternating timeline, so it goes back to stories from college. So it definitely has that like academic vibe to it. Essentially, it's hard to describe the plot of this book, I think, without giving a lot away, but these friends go back. The person who was originally charged with the murder of their friend has been acquitted, I believe, and then like now they don't really know who the killer is, but through them reuniting and telling their stories, they find out secrets, etc., etc. I actually really like this book. I like the main character, and I liked the writing style from the beginning. I thought it was really easy to read and like caught my attention. I did not expect the ending, I will say. I love when like a plot twist I cannot predict happens, because I think that's a sign of good writing. I've read a lot of books and I've watched a lot of shows and movies, so I feel like it's really hard to make a book that's not predictable. But I will say, in my notes, I just wrote the last chapter is so icky, and I don't really remember, but I remember being really grossed out by the last chapter. So now I'm kind of curious what happened, because I don't really remember. Highly recommend it. It is a good fall book. So I ended up giving that 3.9 out of 5 stars. So the next book I read was The Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires by Grady Hendrix, and this book was really interesting. I think I first heard about it on Haley Fan vlogs, and I haven't read a book like this before, I don't think. Like, I don't really know what the genre is. It's kind of thriller, kind of like comedy to me. I don't know if it was trying to be, but anyway, it follows this woman, Patricia, who is like a housewife, and all these other women in her group, they do this book club, and then they think it's like too pretentious and boring, so they start their own book club, and then they read books that they really like, because they're all kind of living this like sad housewives, like they're bored all the time life. And I love that, like the beginning of this book really caught me. I like the writing style right away too. And I like the characters, which helped this book a lot, because it gets so weird. Like, once they start introducing vampires to the book, essentially, like, I don't want to give too much away, but a vampire comes to town, and then these women in the Southern Book Club need to figure out what's going on and like help save their community, essentially. I'm not going to spoil too much else, but there's just like a lot of gross scenes in this, and like a lot of weird descriptions of things, and I think that because I like the characters and I was kind of vibing with like the setting, I didn't really mind it as much. But then if you've read this book, the part that really got to me is the cockroach scene, and that's all I'm going to say about that. I basically almost threw up when I was like the detail of that. I don't know. So if you know, you know, and if you're going to read this, you'll find out. But essentially, there's a lot of gross parts. The ending is kind of like whatever, and like the build-up is not that satisfying. I do think it was an enjoyable read. I ended up giving this 3 out of 5 stars, which is close to what I gave The Wedding Date, but I would put this above The Wedding Date, if that means anything. After that, I went through a Riley Sager moment. I was trying to get The House Across the Lake, but it wasn't at my Barnes & Noble, and I did not want to pay like 30 bucks for it on Amazon, so I still haven't gotten it. But instead, I started with Survive the Night by Riley Sager. It's my first Riley Sager book. How do I describe this without giving a lot away? Okay, it takes place in the 90s, and the main character, her best friend and roommate, was just murdered by a serial killer on campus. So she decides that she needs to like go home immediately, which is fine. But she ends up going to one of those like rideshare boards, which were a thing in the 90s. I'm not like that far past the 90s, and like I cannot fathom just picking someone random to drive you home. But anyway, she goes to a rideshare board. She finds a guy who's going back. I think she's going to like Ohio from like the East Coast. This, in my notes, I said, I would have loved this book so much if the circumstances that got her into the car were more believable. So like, this is not giving anything away. This is right at the beginning of the book. But the whole book takes place in this car because she needs to go home. So she gets a ride with a strange man because she's scared of the serial killer that's on campus and nobody knows who it is. So I'm just like, the 90s is not like 100 years ago, you know? Like, I mean, common sense has been around forever. If you're scared of a serial killer who's a man, assuming it's a man, and you're a young female on campus who looks just like the girls who have been victimized, whatever, like, why would you get in a car with a stranger at night? It's just like, that part like really bothered me, and that's something that you will realize is a common theme in Riley Sager's books, is like lack of common sense. And I actually love like where he's going with these books and like the characters and the plot line, but it's just so hard when it's like unbelievable the decisions that they would make and things like that. Now I don't want to give too much away, but essentially they're in this car, things happen, she starts discovering secrets and putting pieces together. And it's this thriller of like, how does she survive the night, essentially? And the twists were really good. That's one thing I think Riley Sager does a really good job of, like writing twists that aren't predictable. But yeah, it's just so, like, there's a lot of like movie references and very 90s vibes. It's like, it's really good and I recommend it, but it was just so hard for me to like grasp why she would make some of the decisions that she made when she was supposed to be like this scared smart girl. So that's my beef with it, but I highly recommend. I really am a fan of Riley Sager after reading this, and I gave that book, I believe, I gave that a 4 out of 5 stars. Good job, Riley Sager. So then I was really vibing after I read that because I thought it was good. I gave it a 4 stars, which is really good for me. And then right after that, I read Lock Every Door by Riley Sager. And this takes place in a New York City apartment building. It's like this super old historic building. And this girl who's struggling for money has just recently gone through a breakup, needs a place to live, and she's always loved this building. So she accepts a position as an apartment sitter. So I was like pretty into it right away. And also I just had my first trip to New York City this year. So I was definitely feeling like the New York City vibes when I was reading this. But basically, again, no spoilers, but things start happening in this apartment. She starts getting suspicious. She starts figuring things out. The reason this book, to me, like, I thought it was an enjoyable book. There were certain parts that, like, kind of made me lose interest, but, like, I would say, like, as I was reading it, it was a book I would recommend to my friends. But then you get to the end, and the end is just so ridiculous, and, like, what the plot builds up to is so ridiculous. And it's not bad, it's just like something that I would never have predicted in a million years to happen. And it's almost like, this is not where I expected this to be going. Like, this is shocking type of energy. And I think that's why I ended up giving it 3.5 stars. But like, I did enjoy it a lot. And I will say that like, you do get points for something that I can't predict, but you will not predict the ending. Or like what it all builds up to. It was just so crazy. But I did like Survive the Night better. Lock Every Door, I actually thought was going to be going down a witchy route for a while, which I wasn't vibing with, but you'll see how it actually turns out. Now I actually have a physical book. The next book I read was Where the Crawdads Sing, and I feel like the last person in the world to read this book. I've had this book on my shelf forever too, which I don't know why I never read it. But I love this book so much, and I heard a lot of people complain that it's like so slow that like they DNF'd it or like they just hated it because it was so slow. But I actually really like this slow burn, and I don't like a lot of slow burns. Like, it takes a lot to like want me to get to the end. But this was a slow burn in a way that I felt like it made the book better. This is about a girl named Kaya who is like living in extreme poverty with her family in the marsh. I think this is like the East Coast. This is like North Carolina, I believe this takes place, but I know it's on the East Coast, and her family is super poor, and one by one, every member of her family leaves her, and she is literally living on her own by the time she's like 6 years old in the marsh. This is also like a historical fiction, which I didn't even know, but it's also alternating timelines. I'm trying to see what year it takes place. So yeah, the 50s and the 60s. So I thought that was super interesting. Basically, everyone in town refers to her as the Marsh Girl, and it's something that would not happen today, where a 6-year-old could be like living on their own and just be made fun of by the town. Like, now it would be a concern, and she would hopefully be brought to like child services. But in this town, they just think she's like gross, wild, feral child. Her life is really hard, but she figures out how to fend for herself, and I think that's why it's so slow in the beginning, because her life is very lonely and honestly peaceful, because she's living with all this wildlife and she loves the marsh so much, but it's also a struggle and kind of like a marathon to survive, which is like a marathon to read. And I actually thought that was like a really nice way to structure this book. And then basically the alternating timelines end up meeting up, and it is all about the death of this boy in town, this rich, popular boy who's the same age as Kaya. And I don't know if it like spoils it on the back. I don't want to spoil it by saying why it all ends up coming together, but it's really good. And then there is like a court case for his murder at the end. Really, really like the way that they wrote this, because it was a super detailed trial, and I love the justice system. Like, I love watching court shows and like Law and Order, so I liked that aspect of it, but they did not drag it on or make it like boring. So it was only like a couple short chapters that the trial actually took place. And then there's a twist at the end that I was not expecting. So I really recommend this book. I gave it 5 stars. One of the only books I gave 5 stars to in the last 2 months. So yeah. Actually, the next book that I read, I think this might have been like the last book that I read in August, was The Deal by Elle Kennedy, and I love this book so much, like way more than I should have loved this book. So it's about these 2 college kids, Hannah and Garrett, and she is like this bookish singer, like theater major, super smart girl. She's not super into her appearance, but she's like naturally beautiful, and he is this famous hockey player, son of like a former NHL star. Essentially, he needs Hannah to tutor him, which is like a tale as old as time, like tutoring, fall in love, bad boy, good girl. But it's so cute, and you're just like so, like, I just really like this book, and it definitely keeps your attention. It's not a super long book, but I read it on Kindle in like 2 days. Like, I was so into it. The thing I really liked was that while it's like a very cheesy plot line, it had super realistic dialogue, in my opinion. When I was reading it, I felt like I was back in college, and they're like things that I would have said, and I didn't think that the characters had bad communication. I can't stand when characters have bad communication skills. I just felt like it was very realistic, and the relationship was real to me. And honestly, like, when they would describe the things that were happening, like just like the mundane things that were happening, like the studying and the visiting each other's houses, like I could just like picture it happening, and it just brought me right back to college, which I thought was really fun. Along with like the realistic dialogue, there were a lot of parts that seemed very real to me. Like, there's a scene where Hannah is in a coffee shop with this guy she really likes is in front of her, Justin, and he doesn't thank the barista for his coffee, and she like internally is like saying how much that bugs her, and that like sealed the 5-star deal for me. Like, that is so something that I would feel and be like immediate turn off for a guy, that like I really liked that was incorporated into her writing, and it just made me really excited to read the rest of the series, which is about a couple of the other characters that were introduced in The Deal have their own books, and then I believe there's a final book that like catches up with all these couples after so many years. I really like The Deal, really recommend The Deal, and I'm super excited. I can't believe I haven't read The Mistake yet. I actually have it on my Kindle right now. I just have been reading a different series, so I think I only read like 2 books in September, so like, which is really not good. feel like I did more than that. But anyway, the first one was Red, White, and Royal Blue. Also super BookTok and BookTube popular book. It's about like the Prince of England and the first son of the first female president of the United States. And it's kind of like their forbidden star-crossed lovers love story. And there's elements of like politics and scandal. This very archaic institution of royalty accepting like this gay prince. It's a very good. I really enjoyed this book. There are definitely parts of this book that are super, super spicy and like, for some reason, like I don't mind spice in books where I like the couple or whatever, but like I felt like I shouldn't be like knowing this stuff about these two because they're like political figures. I know they're fictional, but like for some reason I feel like I should not know this stuff about like the royal family and the first family. So anyway, if you can get past that, I think it's a really good book. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. 4 out of 5 stars was really good. I knew I forgot something and that I did not only read like 2.5 books last month. I also read All Good People Here by Ashley Flowers. The reason I forgot it was because I bought it on hardcover at Barnes & Noble and I lent it to one of my friends and she's currently reading it. So, if you don't know, Ashley Flowers is the host of the Crime Junkie podcast, and that's actually why I bought it, because I've listened to like every episode of that podcast, and I like the way that she tells stories. There's also an episode she did on the podcast where she fabricated an entire story and then told it, and then you didn't know until the end that it wasn't real. And I really liked the way she did that, and that was honestly what made me think that she would be a really good fiction writer. Essentially, this book, All Good People Here, is an alternating timeline story told from the perspective of 2 different women in 2 different time periods. One, present day, it's a journalist who is coming back to her hometown to take care of her uncle who has dementia. And when she was a kid, a girl who was the same age as her was kidnapped and murdered or whatever. That's not really a spoiler. So then the past, the alternating timeline in the 90s is told by the mother of that young girl. Through her moving back to her hometown, another girl goes missing and she starts investigating because she's a journalist, and she is putting all these pieces together of the crime that happened in the past and the crime that just happened, and it is very twisty, and there are like 2 really big plot twists that I wasn't expecting, and I gave this book a solid 4.5 out of 5 stars. I really enjoyed it, and I'm really impressed that this was her first book that she has written, because I think writing a podcast is probably very different than writing a book. That is another book that I read in September. I'm sorry that I forgot it, but back to you, Jennifer. Don't forget anything else. The next book I read in September was A Good Girl's Guide to Murder. This is the first book in the trilogy. This book is so good. I love this book. This is another really popular book on the internet, A Good Girl's Guide to Murder by Holly Jackson, and it is about a high school senior, Pippa, who is doing her capstone project on a murder that happened in her town. Well, that's super unrealistic because no teacher in high school would ever let you investigate other students and former students in a murder as a 17, 18-year-old. I thought that it was really cute, and right away in the first chapter when she's like presenting her project idea and starting her project, I was so hooked because it was like Holly Jackson just did a really good job, I think, of writing a high schooler. So Pippa is like a very smart, driven high schooler, so she really takes a lot of pride and care in this project, and she does it in a professional way, but then there's always these hints of like literally being a teenager in it that make it really real, and I really liked that because of it. It was so easy to read. I read it in just a couple days, and I just thought like it almost gives like, I would say this is like a cozy mystery, but it's actually a little bit more gory, like that when they describe the murders and stuff, it's like a little bit more than lighthearted, because at first I was like, this is giving me Only Murders in the Building vibes, but just like a little bit more raw and real. And it's not an immature book. I know it's a YA book and it's like about a high school senior, but the plot twists are so good, and I did not see any of them coming. And the thing I really liked is that this main character was so likable because she had so much common sense, and as she found clues, I was expecting in the book for her not to understand what the clues meant or to not put two and two together, because I think that's what authors often use to build suspense. But that drives me insane. Like I've mentioned with Riley Sager's books, I hate a lack of common sense. And in this book, like anytime there was a clue or things to put together, she put them together right away, and then she kind of talked through them. But then that also kind of made me nervous as to like how they're gonna actually have plot twists and create suspense. But she still did it, and she just is like such a good YA book, but also like not even YA. Like I think like my mom would enjoy this book, so highly recommend. And then of course immediately after I finished this book, I had to start the second one, Good Girl Bad Blood. Unfortunately, I am like, let's see how far I am. I'm 63 pages in, so I'm not gonna like judge it completely, but from coming off of like being obsessed with this book to starting this book, I have been disappointed so far in the start of this book, and it's not catching my attention. However, the whole first like 50 pages are kind of like summarizing. It's almost like a here's what happened last week, and then the new story starts. So I'm just starting the new story. I'm hoping that it picks up and gets better, because I rated this one 5 stars, and it's really hard in series to keep that like 5-star energy going, but I hope that this one delivers. So this is what I'm currently reading, and then I do have the third one up there. I don't know if you can see it, and it's in hardcover. The last book that I read in September, I did a whole reading vlog about this, and I was so into it, but I did DNF it, and like, so I did not finish it. And that doesn't mean I'm not going to finish it. I think I'm going to finish it. I got really far in it. The only reason I stopped reading was because I was just like not in the mood to read a biography, which I think is totally fine. Like when I'm in the mood for that, this was really, really good. And I learned a lot, and like I don't think it's necessarily a book that you have to finish all in one sitting. I don't think that any autobiographies are like that really, so I think it's okay. I guess I'm not going to say that I DNF'd it. I'm going to say that I put this book on pause, but for getting like a good chunk, like halfway plus through it, I think it's really good. So, okay, well, thanks so much for watching. Let me know what you read this month, and let me know if you read any of these books too and what you thought. Okay, cool. Okay, I'm going to go read. Bye, guys. Okay, thanks, guys. I love you.